Today, we're looking at a commentary built around a video from Dennis Prager. It links America's destiny to its support for Israel, and then pivots hard into a promotion for a documentary on the invention of the Palestinian identity.
Yeah, this piece is incredibly timely, and the subject matter couldn't be more serious. I think the core message is vital, but to really make it land, the presentation needs to be just as strong as the ideas. Let's jump right in with the structure.
Okay, so the thing that stands out immediately is this big contrast. You have the high-level, sort of philosophical warning from Prager, and then this very sudden, very aggressive pitch for the documentary. It's a real shift.
It is. I'd say it's more than a shift. The material suffers from a severe structural break and tonal whiplash between its philosophical warning about America's future and its final aggressive political segment.
Okay, so unpack that. Tonal whiplash.
Well, the first two-thirds are, they're building this case on deep foundational truths. The God-Israel covenant, how anti-Jewish societies always self-destruct, and the spiritual reasons a society gets better when it adopts Torah values. Moral people, healthy families, all of that. It's very contemplative, very serious.
And that build-up gives it a certain weight, a real intellectual gravity.
Exactly. But then that whole thoughtful space just gets destroyed by the final third. It just pivots on a dime to this super specific inflammatory political point, the whole invention of the Palestinians to destroy another nation.
Using that very strong language, like modern cynical invention and genocidal aims.
Right, and that specific political claim, it just isn't properly introduced. It's not connected to the big societal critique that came before it. So the listener is left thinking, wait, was that whole philosophical part just a setup for a political hit piece?
I see the point about it being abrupt, but isn't there a risk that if you soften that ending, you lose the urgency? You've just spent all this time describing a huge problem. Don't you need to show the concrete modern version of that conflict?
You do, but the urgency has to be earned. It can't just be bolted on at the end. I think to unify the material, the specific political claim should be explicitly framed as a concrete manifestation of the general problem you just discussed.
So it's about building a bridge.
It's about making it one coherent argument. The suggestion is to stop treating the documentary segment like a commercial break and instead reframe it as an essential, high-stakes case study.
Okay, I like that. So how would you execute that? What does that sound like?
Well, you've just argued that turning our backs on these foundational values leads to chaos, right? So now you introduce the documentary's idea as a perfect example of the bad ideologies the Talmud warns about. You're explicitly linking this modern conflict to a society turning away from those values and getting lost in this zero-sum ideological war.
So the documentary stops being a product you're promoting and starts being evidence for the argument you just made?
Precisely. You need some deliberate transitional language. You could say something like, this discussion of foundational values leads us directly to the ideologies that seek to undermine them. In fact, this specific narrative, the invention of the Palestinians, is a perfect example of how the forces that seek to curse Israel work today. You see, that makes the political part essential proof for the philosophical part.
That makes a lot of sense. It really does smooth out that transition. Okay, let's move on to the core argument itself. The central idea is, it's a big one. The U.S. is blessed because it blessed the Jews in Israel, and if that changes, America will stop being blessed. That's a huge assertion.
It's a profound claim. And to bolster the powerful central assertion that a nation's destiny is tied to its treatment of Israel, the material should proactively engage with potential counterinterpretations of historical causation.
So, anticipating the objections.
Yes, because right now it's leaning pretty heavily on a correlation-causation leap. It cites Genesis, it cites the historical precedent that, in every instance when a society descended into hostility to the Jews, it self-destructed.
Well, the speaker does acknowledge that. They say, you may say it's coincidental. I don't think it is. For the target audience, who probably already accepts this framework, isn't that enough?
I think it's a weak defense, especially for the listener who's on the fence. The curious skeptic who needs more than just a theological statement. It acknowledges the secular viewpoint, but it doesn't really engage with it. They'll just hear it and think, okay, correlation, not causation. Next.
So you're saying we need to actually spell out that secular counterargument, even if briefly. But that feels tricky. You don't want to give it too much airtime.
Not at all. You just enhance the persuasive power by briefly articulating it and then immediately refuting it. You build trust by showing you get the other side. So, for example, you'd articulate the secular view that marginalizing Jews is just a symptom of a society that's already falling apart for economic or political reasons, not the cause of the decline.
Okay, so you state that view. Then how do you pivot back and show that the moral framework is a better explanation? How do you prove it's the cause, not just a correlation?
You use the practical explanation that's already in the material. The speaker mentions that Israel is meant to shine the light on creating a model society based on Torah values, integrity, purpose, healthy family. That's your bridge.
Ah, I see.
You argue that blessing Israel is really synonymous with adopting the values that, in a very practical sense, guarantee a stable and successful society. So the decline isn't some magical curse. It's the inevitable structural result of rejecting the moral code that makes a society work.
So the destruction of these societies isn't just a historical coincidence. It's a predictable outcome of abandoning the very principles of stability. You're moving the argument from just a spiritual reward to a practical, almost mechanical consequence of moral choices.
Precisely. You connect the theological command to the real-world utility of the values Israel represent. Suddenly, the argument is much more resilient against that standard secular dismissal. It makes the historical pattern look inevitable, not random.
That really strengthens the whole case. Okay, let's turn to the last section on the changing landscape of anti-Semitism. The piece argues that the danger used to be more from the left because it was culturally acceptable, but now it's rising on the right through clever Jew haters like Tucker Carlson and Fuentes.
Right. And this analysis is timely and necessary, but the analysis of rising right-wing anti-Semitism, while timely and necessary, requires clearer articulation of the rhetorical mechanisms through which it is achieving effectiveness and gaining cultural acceptance on the right.
I see what you mean. There's an imbalance. The piece is really specific about how the left's version works. It dresses itself up as social justice, it seems virtuous.
Exactly. But the threat from the right is just described with this general label, clever Jew hater. To be as insightful as the left-wing analysis, it has to specify the new methods of if neo-Nazi stuff was unacceptable before on mainstream platforms, how are these new views getting a foothold? They're obviously not using swastikas to capture a big mainstream audience.
So the suggestion is to define the actual methodology. How is this new form of hate gaining traction right now?
Yes, the material should define the specific non-overt frames of hostility that are replacing that old neo-Nazi type right-wing anti-Semit. That's how you explain why it's becoming, culturally acceptable in part conservative world. It's about detailing the shift from overt racial hatred to more veiled political or economic.
Okay, so what would those veiled critiques look like? If you're trying to help the listener spot these things in the wild, what are the specific buzzwords or frames they should be listening for?
Well, the hostility is often framed not as hating Jewish people, but as, say, anti-globalism or anti-elitism or an anti-Zionist political critique aimed at certain wealthy people or coastal elites. It's a kind of rhetorical masking.
Rhetorical masking. I like that term.
It's effective because it taps into legitimate political anxieties, like about global finance or media concentration, but it uses them to smuggle in ancient toxic tropes. It uses a shared political language, but carries a coded message underneath.
But how does a speaker point that out without alienating the very conservative audience they're trying to reach? Just directly accusing popular figures seems risky.
It's not about blunt accusation. It's about dissection. You could use examples of this masking in action. Show how hate is disguised as a concern for, say, national sovereignty or constitutional liberty. The audience is told that powerful groups are undermining the nation, maybe through immigration or media control, and that group is identified with coded language about financiers or media moguls. That's how figures like Carlson or Fuentes are able to capture that big audience.
That's incredibly helpful. By explaining the mechanism of this new rhetoric, you're not just warning the audience that a monster exists, you're giving them the tools to see it, even when it's in disguise.
And that ties everything together. We link the philosophical need for these values from Critique 2, show how rejecting them leads to ideological chaos in Critique 1, and then in Critique 3, we show the audience the specific, sophisticated language being used today to spread that chaos. It becomes one unified, Powerful message.
Excellent points. Let's do a quick recap of these actionable steps for our listener.
Sounds good. The focus is really on integration and depth.
Okay, so we've highlighted 3 big opportunities today. First, fix that structural break. Frame the documentary part as a crucial case study of the societal decline you described earlier, not as a jarring commercial. Second, really strengthen your core historical argument. Don't just dismiss the secular counterview. Engage with it and show why the moral framework is a better model for explaining history. And finally, deepen your analysis of right-wing anti-Semitism. Go beyond labels and detail the specific rhetorical mechanisms like masking that are making it effective today.
I think the core ideas here are powerful and absolutely essential, especially that central message from Dennis Prager. Making these changes will create a piece that is just so much more unified and seamless. It'll be far more resistant to critique, and that profound message will land with the maximum possible impact, even on a skeptical audience. The goal is an argument that's as intellectually rigorous as it is spiritually compelling.
We look forward to seeing the revisions. Please feel free to submit your work back to us for a follow-up once you've had a chance to work with these suggestions.